Hey there. Today, we're diving into ancient Rome.
Yeah.
You've provided some great excerpts from the Romans for Dummies,
Right.
which is perfect for a little Roman history refresh.
Uh-huh.
So, buckle up, because we're about to conquer some Roman trivia and uncover what made this civilization so impactful.
I think what's so captivating about Rome is how much their society,
Yeah.
their culture, and
That's
even their
good stuff.
struggles
Right.
still resonate with us today.
Absolutely. It's almost like looking into a mirror, but one reflecting back centuries of history.
It's true. I was just reading about how Roman history itself is calculated, and it got me thinking, did you know that the traditional founding date of Rome, 7053 BC,
Right.
was actually figured out by a scholar named Marcus Terentius Varro, working backward from historical records?
That's right. And it really highlights how history is this fascinating blend of
Yeah.
fact and interpretation.
Right.
He used the records available to him,
Uh-huh.
kind of like piecing together a puzzle, to arrive at that date.
Makes you wonder, though, if we were to apply different methods or discover new evidence,
Right.
would our understanding of Roman history shift?
Absolutely. It's like when people used to calculate the age of the earth based on biblical genealogies, right?
Exactly.
Different methods,
Different interpretations.
different interpretations, but all seeking to understand the past.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to always consider the sources and methods used
Yeah,
to arrive at those historical facts we often take for granted.
for sure.
But speaking of understanding the past, let's move on to Roman society itself.
Okay.
We often think of togas and gladiators,
Right.
but the sources paint a much more complex picture.
They do. But
About-
it's like a social ladder, right?
Yeah.
Enslaved people at the bottom, then freedmen, citizens, and finally the elite equestrians, wealthy landowners, and senators at the top,
Right.
all based on a combination of wealth and family ties.
And it's important to remember that the very concept of citizenship
Yeah.
was central to Roman identity, and it actually evolved over time. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to all free men in the empire.
Wow.
Now, some historians argue this was a strategic move to increase the tax base
Okay.
and bolster military recruitment,
Makes sense.
while others believe he was driven by a more idealistic vision of a unified Roman people.
Interesting. So what would it have been like to live as a Roman citizen? I mean, we have these grand images of the Colosseum and Roman baths, but what about everyday life?
Well, imagine a world without electricity, where your day is literally governed by the sun.
Wow.
The Romans used a 12-hour system measured by sundials.
Oh, that's right. I was reading about how even something as simple as wearing a toga could be a complex social signal.
It's true.
Apparently the type of toga you wore,
Uh-huh.
the color, the way it was draped, all conveyed information about your status and role in society.
It's true. And get this, prostitutes were required to wear togas.
Really?
But in their case, it was a mark of shame,
Wow.
a way to visually set them apart. It makes you realize how much clothing could be used to enforce social norms and hierarchies.
It's true. And then there's the whole bread and circuses thing.
right.
Was that really just about keeping the populace entertained?
On the surface, yes.
Hmm.
The gladiatorial games, chariot races, even the distribution of free grain.
I see.
These were all incredibly effective ways to keep the masses content
Right.
and distract them from the realities of poverty or political turmoil.
Mm-hmm. But I think there's a deeper insight here.
I'm listening. Some historians argue that this constant focus on entertainment,
Yeah.
while effective in the short term, ultimately contributed to a decline in civic engagement
Okay.
and a weakening of the Roman spirit.
Interesting.
It raises the question, can a society truly thrive when its citizens are constantly distracted?
That's a really interesting point. I never thought of it that way. But let's talk about how individuals actually gained power in Roman society. Was
Okay.
it all about being born into the right family?
Not entirely.
Mm.
While family connections certainly helped,
Yeah.
there was a more formal path to power known as the cursus honorum.
Okay.
It was a sequence of political and military offices that ambitious Romans had to hold in order to advance their careers.
So there was a system.
It's like a carefully structured ladder,
Mm.
with each rung representing a higher level of responsibility and prestige.
I see.
You started with lower level positions, like serving as a quaestor, managing finances,
Okay.
and worked your way up to praetor, a judge or provincial governor,
Uh-huh.
and finally consul, the highest elected office in the Roman Republic.
Wow. So it was all about serving the state, gaining experience, improving your worth. But I'm guessing there was also a lot of backstabbing and maneuvering for power.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are full of examples of how ambition and greed often corrupted those in power.
Yeah.
We see instances of rivalries, conspiracies, even assassinations.
Wow.
Roman politics could be a dangerous game.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does. Which I think is why studying Roman history can be so illuminating.
Yeah.
It reveals these universal patterns of human behavior. Ambition,
Yeah.
the struggle for power, the dangers of corruption.
Right.
These are themes that transcend time and place.
And this brings us to the Roman military.
Okay.
The sources make it clear that Rome was almost constantly at war from its early days as a republic to its expansion into a vast empire.
Right.
Were they just naturally aggressive, or was there more to it?
Well, the Romans were certainly a militaristic society. They placed a high value on military service and saw conquest as a way to acquire land, resources, and glory.
Right.
But there's also a strategic element at play.
How's
The
that?
Roman Republic, and later the Empire, was surrounded by potential enemies.
Okay.
Expanding their territory was often seen as a way to create buffer zones and protect their core territories from invasion. It's a classic example of offense being the best defense.
Right.
They developed a highly organized military with legions, auxiliaries forts, frontier defenses like Hadrian's Wall. It was all very strategic.
And yet all this expansion, this constant warfare, had to have a cost, right?
You're absolutely right. The sources point to the impact of war on Roman society.
Yeah.
From the economic burden of maintaining a large army to the psychological toll on the soldiers themselves and their families.
Of course.
It's a reminder that even when a society achieves military victory, there are always consequences.
It's true. It makes you think about the true cost of empire, doesn't it? But this is where the Roman emperors come in, right? From republic to empire, a whole new chapter of Roman history unfolds.
And with the rise of emperors like Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, and of course the infamous Caligula and Nero, we enter a world of larger-than-life personalities, political intrigue, and dramatic shifts in power.
It's interesting, though, because even within this imperial system, you see individuals like Crassus, a rebel emperor in Britain, who modeled his regime on ancient Roman traditions.
Fascinating.
It's as if he was trying to create his own mini-Rome within the larger empire. What do you make of figures like that?
Crassus is a fascinating case study. He shows us that Romanization, the spread of Roman culture and institutions, was a complex process. Sometimes it led to assimilation and loyalty. And other times it sparked rebellion and a desire for autonomy.
Interesting.
It's a reminder that even within a vast empire, there are always competing forces at play.
We tend to think of Roman history in these broad strokes, but the sources really highlight the individual stories, the personalities, the choices that shaped this civilization, like Cincinnatus, this stoic Roman citizen who twice left his farm to become dictator, saved Rome from its enemies, and then voluntarily returned to his simple life.
He embodies this ideal of Roman virtue, this sense of duty and selflessness that was so admired.
Right, and then we have figures like Cato the Elder, a staunch traditionalist who opposed Greek influence and fought to preserve what he saw as the true Roman values. He gives us a glimpse into the internal tensions within Roman society, the debates over tradition versus change. It's fascinating to see how these individual stories connect to larger themes. And speaking of themes, we can't ignore the coming of Christianity, can we?
Absolutely not.
What a turning point in Roman history.
Huge.
Here's this new religion, clashing with traditional Roman beliefs, and ultimately transforming the empire from within.
It's a story of both conflict and adaptation. We see early Christians trying to navigate this pagan world, adopting Roman practices, while also facing persecution for their beliefs.
It makes you wonder, how did this seemingly small and marginalized sect eventually become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire? It's almost like an underdog story, right? But it also makes you think about the power of ideas to reshape societies.
And the power of individuals to drive that change.
Absolutely.
But this change wasn't always peaceful. The rise of Christianity also led to internal struggles within the church itself. And contributed to the eventual division of the empire into East and West.
So much to unpack here. And of course, looming over everything is the eventual fall of Rome. It wasn't just about those barbarian invasions, was it?
Not at all. While the barbarian migration certainly played a major role, the sources point to a more complex set of factors. Economic instability, political corruption, social unrest, a decline in civic virtue.
Yeah.
It was a perfect storm of internal weaknesses that made Rome vulnerable to external threats.
It's interesting because we often think of the fall of Rome as a single event, but it was actually a long and drawn-out process,
It was.
a gradual decline spanning centuries.
And even then, it's important to remember that only the Western Roman Empire truly fell.
That's right.
The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople and known as Byzantium, carried on for another 1,000 years.
That's a really important point. It challenges our assumptions about historical narratives and forces us to look deeper. But I think we need to take a break here and come back to this.
Yeah.
We've barely scratched the surface.
Ready to delve deeper into the fabric of Roman society. It's not all emperors and legions,
I'm all ears. I think what fascinates me most is how the Romans managed to create such a complex and enduring civilization.
Yeah.
What was the glue that held it all together?
Well, like many civilizations, the foundation of their economy was agriculture.
Okay.
Millions of farmers and peasants worked the land, producing the food that fed the empire.
But the sources also suggest that the Romans had this almost romantic view of the countryside, even if they lived in bustling cities.
It is interesting.
Why was that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? They saw farming as this noble pursuit, a source of Roman virtue and strength. They believed that the hard work and simple life of a farmer cultivated the qualities that made Rome great. Discipline, resilience, a connection to the land.
And that's where Roman villas come in, right?
Yeah,
They were much more than just farmhouses.
These elaborate estates were expressions of wealth, status, and a way of life. Think of Pliny the Younger's seaside retreat, for example. He even had a dedicated room for thinking and dictating.
Wow.
It's a far cry from a simple farmer's hut.
The sources describe villas with incredible features. Mosaics, fountains, gardens, even heated floors. They clearly put a lot of thought into designing these spaces for comfort and aesthetics.
And I think these villas also represent this interesting tension within Roman society.
Okay.
On the one hand, you have this idealization of rural life. But on the other hand, you have this incredible drive for urbanization and sophistication. Roman villas were a way for wealthy Romans to enjoy the best of both worlds.
So it wasn't just Romans building these villas.
Not at all. As the Roman Empire expanded, we see conquered peoples adopting this architectural style and way of life.
Right.
It's an example of how Romanization, the spread of Roman culture and institutions,
Yeah.
worked on multiple levels. It wasn't just about imposing Roman rule. It was about introducing a whole new way of life.
And speaking of a new way of life, let's talk about Roman cities. The sources describe Rome itself as this blueprint for Roman civilization. What made Roman cities so unique?
For one thing, they were masters of urban planning and infrastructure. They developed sophisticated systems for water supply, sewage disposal, and transportation.
Wow.
Imagine aqueducts bringing fresh water into the city from miles away, public baths for hygiene and social gatherings, and a network of roads that connected the empire like never before.
The scale of their engineering is mind-boggling. Those aqueducts are incredible feats of engineering.
They are.
And I was reading about the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer system. It was so large that boats could sail through it.
I know.
It's hard to believe they built something so complex so long ago.
It's a testament to their ingenuity and organizational skills. And these advancements weren't just limited to Rome itself.
Right.
As the empire expanded, they brought their knowledge of urban planning and engineering to other cities, transforming the landscape and creating a more interconnected world.
So Romanization wasn't just about adopting Roman customs and beliefs. It was also about experiencing a whole new way of life in these well-planned and well-equipped cities.
Precisely. And all of this was made possible by another key aspect of Roman civilization: trade. The sources talk about this vast network of Roman trade routes that spanned the entire Mediterranean world.
Right, and they traded in everything. Food, wine, pottery, textiles, precious metals.
Right.
It's as if the Roman world was this giant marketplace with goods and ideas flowing in all directions.
And to facilitate this trade, they even had a standardized currency system.
Really?
With coins minted in Rome and other major cities. This made transactions easier and helped to integrate the economies of different regions.
It's incredible to think about the impact this must have had on Roman society, bringing in new goods, new ideas, new ways of life from all corners of the empire.
Absolutely. Trade was a major engine of Roman prosperity and cultural exchange. It also helped to spread Roman influence far beyond their military conquests. You can imagine how people in distant provinces seeing these Roman goods
Hmm.
and experiencing the benefits of Roman infrastructure might start to see the appeal of Roman culture
Yeah.
and want to be a part of it.
It's this complex interplay of economics, politics, and culture, isn't it?
It is, and speaking of culture, let's not forget Roman religion.
Right.
The sources describe a world filled with gods and goddesses, rituals and beliefs that permeated every aspect of Roman
It
life.
seems like they saw the divine in everything, from the natural world to their daily routine.
Yes, the Romans had a very polytheistic worldview. They believed in a multitude of gods,
Right.
each with their own specific roles and powers.
Oh,
Jupiter, the king of the gods, Mars, the god of war, Venus, the goddess of love.
right.
These are just a few of the major deities they worshipped.
And they had all sorts of ways of worshiping these gods. Grand temples, household shrines, festivals, processions, sacrifices. It's a far cry from the more austere religions we might be familiar with today.
But it's important to remember that not all Romans were devout believers. Some were skeptical, while others saw religion as an opportunity for personal gain.
I see.
The sources even mention instances of corruption within the priesthood and religious scams.
Really?
It's like that story about the soothsayer who tricked a yokel into cutting off a goat's testicles during his sacrifice,
Oh my God.
claiming it was necessary to appease the gods.
Wow.
Clearly, not everyone took religious rituals seriously.
That's crazy, but it also reminds us that even in a society deeply steeped in religious tradition, there were always individuals who questioned, exploited, or simply poked fun at those beliefs.
Right.
And this brings us to a pivotal moment in Roman history, the rise of Christianity. This is where things get really interesting.
Yes.
Here's this new religion, emerging in a world dominated by pagan beliefs, and eventually becoming the dominant force in the Roman Empire.
It's amazing.
How did that happen?
It's a complex story,
Hmm.
but I think it speaks to the power of ideas and the human desire for meaning and connection.
Mm-hmm.
Early Christians offered a message of hope, salvation, and community that resonated with people from all walks of life,
Okay.
especially those marginalized or disillusioned with the Roman system.
And they were willing to face persecution for their beliefs. It's almost like their defiance in the face of adversity made their message even more appealing.
It's certainly a compelling narrative,
Uh,
but the story of Christianity in Rome is also one of adaptation.
okay.
We see evidence of early Christians trying to integrate into Roman society,
Uh-huh.
adopting Roman practices, and even reinterpreting traditional Roman symbols and rituals to fit their own beliefs.
So it's not just about conflict, but also about cultural exchange and blending.
Exactly. The rise of Christianity is a reminder that cultural transformations are rarely neat and tidy.
Mm.
They often involve both conflict and assimilation, a pushing and pulling between tradition and innovation.
And of course, this religious shift had a profound impact on the Roman Empire itself, leading to internal divisions, power struggles, and ultimately contributing to the rise of a new Christianized Europe.
Absolutely. It's a legacy that continues to shape our world today.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the foundations of Roman society to the complexities of their beliefs and the seismic shift brought about by Christianity. But there's still so much to explore.
Okay, so we've explored the foundations of Roman society, from their impressive cities and complex social structures to the fascinating evolution of their beliefs. But now I'm curious about the later stages of Roman history, the period after the Julio-Claudian dynasty.
Hmm.
The sources hint at some pretty turbulent times. You're right to be curious. The period following Nero's death in AD 68 was a real turning point. It's known as the Year of the Four Emperors, and as you might imagine, it plunged Rome into a chaotic civil war.
4 emperors in 1 year. That's almost hard to fathom what was going on.
It was a period of intense power struggles and uncertainty, with different factions vying for control of the empire. Military leaders, ambitious senators, even provincial governors. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie. Ultimately, though, it was Vespasian who emerged as the victor, establishing the Flavian dynasty.
I remember reading about him. He seemed to be a pretty pragmatic ruler, focused on restoring order and stability after all that chaos.
He was indeed, the sources describe him as practical and down-to-earth, a stark contrast to some of his more flamboyant predecessors. He focused on rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire, consolidating his power and strengthening the empire's finances.
And wasn't he the one who started building the Colosseum?
He was. A pretty impressive legacy, wouldn't you say? It's interesting to think about how he used these grand architectural projects to both provide employment and create a sense of unity and awe among the Roman people.
His sons Titus and Domitian followed him as emperors. Did they live up to their father's reputation?
Well, Titus, who you might remember for his generosity in the completion of the Colosseum, had a relatively short but popular reign. He's often seen as a benevolent ruler concerned for the welfare of his people. Domitian, on the other hand, was a bit more complex. He was known for his authoritarian tendencies and faced considerable opposition from the Senate, who saw him as a threat to their power.
It sounds like family dynamics played a role even in the highest echelons of Roman society. But by the end of the first century AD, it seems like the Roman Empire had weathered those storms and emerged stronger. How did things progress in the second century?
The 2nd century AD is often considered a golden age for the Roman Empire. It was a time of relative peace, prosperity, and expansion under a series of capable emperors like Trajan Hadrian and Antoninus Pius.
Trajan, the soldier emperor, expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, right? And Hadrian, if I remember correctly, focused more on consolidating those gains and strengthening the empire's frontiers.
You're exactly right. Hadrian is fascinating. He's this incredibly energetic and hands-on emperor who traveled extensively throughout the empire, inspecting legions, building fortifications, and overseeing infrastructure projects. We have records of him visiting almost every province, from Britain to Syria.
And wasn't he the one who built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, that massive fortification designed to keep out the Picts?
He was. It's a testament to Roman engineering and their determination to secure their borders. And then you have Antoninus Pius, who's known for his long and peaceful reign. He focused on administrative reforms, maintaining stability, and ensuring the smooth functioning of the empire.
It sounds like a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity, but I'm guessing there were still challenges lurking beneath the surface.
You're right to be skeptical. Even during this golden age, there were signs of trouble brewing. The sources mention Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, who faced increasing pressure from Germanic tribes pushing against the empire's northern frontiers.
I remember reading about him. He was a Stoic philosopher, right? It's interesting to imagine a Roman emperor grappling with these complex philosophical ideas while also dealing with the practicalities of ruling a vast empire.
He was a fascinating figure, wrestling with questions of duty, virtue, and the nature of good governance. But his reign marked the beginning of the end of the Pax Romana, that long period of peace and stability that had defined the Roman Empire for centuries.
And then his son Commodus was a completely different story, right?
Unfortunately, yes, Commodus is often portrayed as a cruel and narcissistic ruler who was more interested in gladiatorial combat and personal pleasures than governing the empire. His reign was a stark reminder that even the most successful dynasties could produce flawed and destructive leaders.
His assassination in AD 192 must have sent shockwaves through the empire. What happened next?
Well, as you might expect, Commodus's death triggered another round of civil war, a chaotic period of power struggles and instability. The 3rd century AD was a tumultuous time for the Roman Empire. It's known as the crisis of the 3rd century, and it's marked by a seemingly endless cycle of soldier emperors, rebellions, barbarian invasions, and economic hardship.
Wow, that sounds intense. It's hard to imagine the Roman Empire, this seemingly unshakable force, facing such existential threats.
It's a period that really challenges our perceptions of Roman invincibility. It's a reminder that even the most powerful empires are vulnerable to internal decay and external pressures. And it's during this time of crisis that we see figures like Carausius, the rebel emperor, who established his own breakaway state in Britain.
He's almost like a symbol of the centrifugal forces pulling the empire apart. But in a way, he's also a product of Romanization, right? He modeled his regime on Roman traditions and institutions, even as he sought to break away from Roman control.
You've hit on a key point there. Carausius' story highlights the complexities and contradictions of Romanization. It was a process that could foster both loyalty and resentment integration and fragmentation.
It's a reminder that history is rarely a simple linear narrative. It's full of these twists and turns, unexpected outcomes, and individuals who defy easy categorization. But amidst all this chaos and upheaval, there were also individuals who tried to restore order and save the empire from collapse.
Yes, and one of the most significant figures in this regard was Diocletian, who rose to power in AD 284. He recognized that the old system of government was no longer working. The empire had become too large, too complex, and too vulnerable to internal divisions. So he implemented some radical reforms, introducing the Tetrarchy.
The Tetrarchy, what's that?
It was a system of rule by 4 emperors, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars, designed to divide the burden of governing this vast empire and to provide a more stable system of succession. It's as if he was trying to create a more manageable and resilient form of government. He also restructured the army, reformed the tax system, and attempted to stabilize the economy.
It sounds like he was a real innovator, a leader trying to adapt to these unprecedented challenges, but were his reforms successful?
They were successful in the short term. They did buy the empire some time, but the problems facing Rome were deeply rooted, and the empire was already on a trajectory of decline.
And this is where Constantine the Great enters the picture, right? The emperor who embraced Christianity and shifted the empire's center of power eastward.
Exactly. Constantine was a pivotal figure. His conversion to Christianity in AD 312 and his subsequent Edict of Milan in 313, which granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, had a profound impact on the course of Roman history and indeed Western civilization.
I think many people know him for founding Constantinople, the new capital of the Roman Empire. It was strategically located on the Bosporus, a crossroads of trade and culture, and it would become a center of power and influence for the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, for centuries to come.
His reign marked a new era for the Roman world, one in which Christianity played an increasingly central role, and the empire's center of gravity shifted eastward. But despite his efforts, the Western Roman Empire continued to struggle.
Those barbarian invasions were relentless, weren't they? And the internal problems, economic instability, political corruption, social unrest, they didn't just disappear overnight.
It's important to remember that historical processes often unfold over long periods of time. There's rarely a single moment or event that marks a definitive break with the past, and so it was with the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in AD 410 must have been a traumatic event for the Romans.
It was a symbolic blow, capturing the imagination of people across the empire. But even then, the Western Roman Empire lingered on for a few more decades. It wasn't until 476 AD that the last Roman emperor in the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by a Germanic general.
That's the date that often gets cited as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But it seems like it was more of a culmination of a long process of decline and transformation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a result of centuries of internal and external pressures. And even then, as we've discussed, the Eastern Roman Empire centered in Constantinople lived on for another 1,000 years.
It's a reminder that historical narratives are rarely simple or straightforward. There are always multiple perspectives, complex factors at play, and legacies that endure long after political structures have changed.
That's one of the things that makes studying history so fascinating, wouldn't you say? It challenges us to question our assumptions, to delve deeper into the complexities of the past, and to recognize the enduring influence of those who came before us.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of that today. We've gone from the founding of Rome to the rise and fall of an empire, exploring the complexities of their society, their culture, and their lasting legacy.
It's been a pleasure diving into these sources with you. But as you said earlier, we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover about the Roman world.
And to all our listeners out there, if this has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to delve deeper into Roman history. You might be surprised at how much it reveals about ourselves and the world we live in today, Val.